I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be talking to the wonderful Sharon Horgan, who is the creator, writer, executive producer, and actor for Bad Sisters. And I wanted to start in talking a little bit about just the way that you kind of had to adapt your writing process and style when you stepped into creating this show, because you'd very much been working in the sitcom space in kind of like the 30-minute, couple of jokes every single page. And the structure and the tone of this was something very different for you when you first set about this endeavor. And I was just interested in kind of what that looked like for you and how you kind of found your footing along the way.
Yeah, it was a bit of a process, but then I was sort of thinking as I was doing it that when I was writing, my first sitcom, I didn't know how to write a sitcom. You kind of, I think if you're someone who is a genuine fan of stories and TV and film and, narratives, then you've kind of subconsciously been learning the whole time, because you've been watching so intently. So I think with drama, sorry, dogs and cats are just coming in and out. With drama, it was the same thing. I was so, I kind of watched more drama than I did comedy, if I'm honest. I never really, I always sort of thought like if I watch comedy, that's like homework. So it's, very sort of like very aware of the sort of structural difference and sort of by osmosis had kind of learned it, I think. But it really is, I think, sort of a bit trial and error and having the right team of people around you. My producer was a drama producer, our story editor was worked in drama. It was me kind of pretending I knew what I was doing, and then lots of people who really did know what they were doing, um, helping to guide me because um, the thing is that like really it's all about the story and it's about the tone and it's about character and so all of that stuff I knew I could do it. It's just obviously with something like Bad Sisters that's dealing with quite heavy subject matter, it's just being extra aware of how you represent that and how you sort of tread the line between comedy and drama. And it's the same as a performer. It was something, you kind of had to be aware of a lot. And, when you sort of play it for laughs and when you completely turn it and break an audience's heart, hopefully, it's just being very, very I just have to be very, very mindful of the tone all the time.
And even just in terms of the format and the story narrative for season one had kind of a little bit of a structure built into it, because you almost had like the attempted murder of the week, and you had those first few
Yeah,
episodes where you gave us the backstory for each of the sisters and all of their
yeah.
interactions with the prick. And season two, in kind of dealing with the aftermath of, well, how has that impacted all of them even a couple of years later, is such a great exploration. And I know that you put together a writer's room to try to explore, is there even a story that we can tell for a season two?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how did that exploration even help you in figuring out, how are we going to tell the story when that format and that structure wouldn't work for the story that we're telling for this season?
Well, we did actually try and yes, we did an sort of exploratory writer's room, which I actually think was only a week or something, to see if there was something in an idea that I'd had of how we could continue it. Um and for a while we sort of thought, well, shall we continue with the sort of the two timelines, shall we continue with um well, in actual fact, even in the first series, it wasn't totally murder of the week. We sort of there was so much family relationship stuff and the sort of the fallout from the thing that they were doing, the big bad thing that we found ourselves more interested in, that it became less murder of the week. So I think we knew that that would work. We knew that we had characters that people wanted to spend time with and relationships that we'd sort of developed over the course of the first season. So it was about sort of finding a way for the show to feel like Bad Sisters whilst removing so many of those things that were essentially Bad Sisters, the prick, the two timelines, the attempted murders. and whether we could find a different sort of structure that kind of still allowed it to have that flavor, because we still wanted that. We knew there was going to be an awful lot of grief in this show, but we still needed it to have the Bad Sisters tone. So we still needed to find ways to have that sort of caper element, where you get them out on a boat, and drowning a woman, or, we get them um kidnapping bunnies, or whatever it is that sort of helped give it that sort of it's very specific tone. um and what we did was we still sort of focused on a sister's story every week, and I don't it might not even, in a way it's kind of nice if it's not even really noticed, but it just, in a way, it kind of gave us its own sort of loose structure, and then naturally the story gave us its own structure, which is this sort of decoy villain sort of thing in Angelica. And when that truth comes out, this, that the last third is about the sort of the realization and how we get him, kind of thing. So different sort of things arose, but in that initial story room, we could only do so much, but it was just sort of seeing if there felt like a world that we wanted to explore. And for me, it felt, the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to see the aftermath of, you know, what happens when you kill the father of your child. Like, if you're a very good person and you've been isolated for so many years and kept all these secrets, like, what do you do when someone else comes along to wreak havoc, And there were so many things there that I felt, gave me sort of goosebumps, that I thought, we'd like to see these sisters involved in.
And you were mentioning before that there was a really fine thread in figuring out your performance as well with the tone of the show, because there's a lot of grief at play for Eva, but at the same time, it doesn't feel claustrophobic because you can have these waves of grief and it's very reflective of, it kind of hits you in these moments, but it's not a constant thing when you're experiencing it.
Yes,
And so
yeah.
when you were figuring out how to play that, what were a lot of the threads that you had to kind of find and figure out for yourself?
Well, I think it was just to trust that what we were doing was right. I think we had to trust that we didn't need the characters to constantly wear their grief on their sleeves. And, you know, I think, we've all experienced grief of one kind or other, and it really, it's a strange, awful thing, but it surprises you constantly, So I think it was that we had to trust that our audience would see that it was a real reaction, that you can be on the floor 1 minute and the next minute you're singing karaoke and laughing with your sisters, because that's how it is. So we had to sort of, you know, write the show that write the story that felt truthful, and then when it came to the playing of it, it was like I wanted to always be aware of it. I didn't want to not be thinking about Grace in any scene, or at least, that for her to flash into my head, or, a moment of regret, or a moment like a beautiful memory, or like, I felt like I wanted to be aware of her all the time, but it didn't always like come to a head all the time. And when it did, just let it flow, just go with it. And so, yeah, it was different from the first season in a lot of ways, because obviously in the first season she's got this secret that she's carrying, and it's sort of impacted on her life and all her choices, but it had to be deeply hidden, otherwise, you'd be like, what's going on? But, with this season, the audience have seen what's happened, and it's almost like, it's almost expected, but also life goes on, and we had to show life going on. You know, you have responsibilities, and you have, a job, or you have someone you have to protect, or funny stuff does happen when you're in the throes of guilt as grief as well. You know, someone cracks a joke and you crack up laughing. It doesn't mean that you're not feeling it. But all that stuff, it was just being mindful of that really, as much as I could.
And you have these moments between Eva and Ian where they kind of start to build an intimacy and a connection with each other. And in going back and rewatching the episodes, once you know who Ian really is and the fact that he preys on vulnerabilities, you see exactly what he's doing with her. And even a moment where, Blarnard's lashing out and saying, "You're not my mom, you're not anybody's parent," and knowing that that's such a sore point for Eva, we see Ian kind of really using that moment to make a move and use it to make a connection. And how did you want to explore the way that in building this relationship with Eva, we're kind of seeing some of the playbook that he would have used when he first met Grace?
Oh yeah, and it was so scary doing that because I knew people were going to be really angry at me. Not at me, at Eva, and feel like, is she a weak woman? I knew that there would be an element of the audience who would go, she's suffered grief, he's suffered grief, just let them be, but I knew the majority would be like, what are you doing? So it was just having to keep that under wraps, knowing that an audience don't know the full manipulation of her. They see that she's vulnerable and they see that she needs someone in her life, and they see that, Blanet's like um giving her this terrible hard time, and she's sort of trying to balance being a surrogate mum with her own grief. So all of that leads to a sort of vulnerability where you're open. But I just had to kind of hold fast to the idea that when people did realize who he was, then they would see, they would be able to, with hindsight, sort of see how he got under her skin. And that particular moment that you're describing there was the one that I was most worried about. But she's destroyed, she's like in absolute turmoil, and of course that's when he's gonna get in there.
I also think because you play the push and pull and, even the conversation that she has with Ian through the door, where she's literally hiding in the bathroom. And when she tells her sisters that she thinks she likes him, it's the most embarrassing thing she could admit to
Oh,
them. And,
yeah.
there's a lot of moments of just kind of stealing away because the idea of her sisters judging her or feeling like she's hurting them is like the biggest letdown that she can imagine. And when you were kind of mapping that out as a narrative for her and then stepping into playing it, how did you want to make sure that you were constantly showing that internal battle that she's having throughout?
Well, I knew, we have this great secret weapon, which is BB, and her harshness. And however much understanding or sympathy you might get from Ursula, or at least, with Becca, there would have been some openness. With BB, it would have been black and white and terrifying, by the way. So she I thought that was just very human. I think, well, in the writing of it and the playing of it, it just had to, it could never seem sneaky. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that would have put a different slant on it entirely. There had to just be a fear and a confusion and a childlikeness, which is that's the sore that BB pokes, because it does seem so teenage, but Eva's someone who's, as much as I hate the phrase, has been unlucky in love, and had sort of come to a place where she was really accepting of, not that she wasn't going to have a traditional life, in that way. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that, there wasn't a deep, deep longing for that not to be the case, So, and I feel like the audience had a history with that character as well because of that. So yeah, it was just trying to balance, um, obviously moving the story forward, you've only got a certain amount of time to do it, but also um just making it as human and vulnerable as possible. And that fight with BB at the 40 foot where she just says the most brutal things to her, I knew we'd hopefully bring the audience back, you know, get a little sympathy for her. She, you know, she's a woman suffering grief and she's been punched in the stomach again. And I don't know, I felt, you know, it was just a kind of balance thing. It was just like a constantly keeping an eye on it. And in the edit, it's so lucky because you get, you know, that you get to tell a story 3 times, they say, you know, once in the scripts, then when you're on set, and then again in the edit. And so there was always little bits that we felt we needed to, you know, take something from or add something to. We were able to sort of, you know, sort of um just sort of, you know, fiddle with the ingredients in the edit to get it right.
And one of the moments that I really love in the show that's so reflective of the way that you can ride all these different wavelengths in a singular moment is at Eva's birthday party when they have the karaoke machine. And at first she's sitting out on the stairwell by herself, kind of just being a little bit inward. And then Ian comes down and they have a moment. And then all of a sudden she's in the room singing later in the evening with her sisters, singing the Cranberries When You're Gone. And that's the
Yeah.
moment that Becca tells the rest of them that she's pregnant. And I just thought there's so many different kind of calibrations of emotion throughout those two
Yeah.
singular scenes. And I was interested in all of that coming together and just finding the layers of it.
Yeah, I mean, because there were so many layers, because there was, you know, BB is having a hard time, you know, in her sort of journey to having another baby. Ursula's no longer a sort of traditional, not a traditional mother, but you know, her family setup is split. It's, you know, she's living at Eva's. It's, you know, everyone has history and emotions that were adding to that scene. And so it was almost like a worry that we were trying to do too many things. And so really that moment with Ian was probably the last thing I felt like needed to be brought into that room, because first of all, it was, you know, incredibly surprising to her. Secondly, she didn't, you know, if you go back and look, he's the one who he initiates this, you know, moment where they really look at each other. She breaks it. She like immediately just like gets the hell out of there. And for her, like playing it, I didn't want an audience to think she's thinking about that. I wanted it to be, I wish I really miss Grace tonight. And then everything that comes after that is to do with Becca. And I mean, for Eva, that's her baby, really. You know, her baby's having a baby, and that they wish they were sharing that moment with Grace. And so it did in the end feel organic. Like it didn't feel like there was too many irons in the fire, but the Ian of it, I kind of just, you know, had to park, and that felt right, you know. You know,
And
like with an audience, and audiences are so sophisticated now. You know, they also don't need to see everything played out in every scene, you know, because that's not how life works anyway, you know. So you kind of have to trust that they're going to remember this story, and you know.
no, you're so right with that. And in talking a little bit about the last episode and the confrontation with Ian, I feel like for Eva, there's so much emotion at play because it's not just about her in that moment. The fact that she feels the need to ask, "Did you even ever love Grace?" Because she needs to know that it wasn't all for nothing and that something
Yeah.
mattered.
Yeah.
What was important to you to really capture in all the different emotions for Eva throughout that entire sequence?
Yeah, that was really hard actually, because it was so technical, that stuff, you know, with you know, the moment where he attacks Becca and that fall, and then the, you know, the clubbing, and then the even how the blood sort of drained through the tiles. There was, you know, Fiona Shaw as Angelica, getting that, you know, right. It was all very like lots of stunt people and lots of things going on. And so for me, it was like I had to just like keep this sort of core thing of, um, you know, sort of manage to hold on to that emotion, so that when I get to ask him that question, it's sort of, you feel not and it's at that point it's about her as well. Like, it is, you know, f feeling she feels like such a stupid woman. And it's almost like she needs to be told that she wasn't just entirely stupid, that there was something in there as well, that maybe he had feelings for her. So even though that's like much lower down the ladder, it's part of it, her own deep humiliation about how she behaved. And that, and that she wasn't there for Grace that night when she called, through no fault of her own. But, all of that. Uh, but it was just trying to hold on to that and make sure that I could find, the space to kind of deliver it in amongst all the chaos of shooting a scene like that, because sometimes you need to be able to walk off around the corner, find it and then come in. But you just couldn't do that. You just had to in the scene. And luckily the words, sometimes it's just as simple as that, saying because my sister loved you very much was just a very heartbreaking thing to say. And so the words kind of did a lot of it. You didn't have to try to.
And the detail of the fact that Ursula's the one that clocks him on the head, and even after all that he does, and even after, he pushes Becca, none of them ever lay a hand on him. And even when they think it's Ursula, none of them lay a hand on her. And
Angelica, even when
sorry,
they
and
think, yeah. Yeah, I know. You know what? That was something I cannot tell you. We went round the houses with that because we did think it was going to be one of them. And we even toyed with a while with it being Blonde. Um, but it felt so right because that poor woman, you know, not only did we want to put her through the ringer a little bit more, but also we wanted her to be the hero. I mean, that she causes all the chaos, but she does what everyone kind of wanted to do. I hope in that moment, everyone would have wanted to give him a blow on the head with a camogie stick. But yeah, I mean that gave me enormous pleasure, that she got to be the hero in that moment because she was such a misunderstood character. I mean, a bigot and someone who, you know, um, is performative in their charity and um, just a real, and in a lot of ways, an awful woman. But she's also, a hurt person and someone who's sort of life hasn't worked out for, and someone who thought she'd found a kindred spirit in Grace, and someone who got very confused and really at the end just wanted to be loved, really. And I felt like I want to give her the stick to deliver the final blow.
it's such a great choice. And I remember when you were writing Catastrophe and working on that show that you would talk about how you would have these moments where you'd get on set and be like, oh, I've really written myself into a corner because now I have to actually do this scene, but I've only got myself to blame.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you had any moments like that on Bad Sisters as well, just because you've kind of really asked a lot of yourself performance-wise in the writing that you've given yourself in this show.
Yeah. Yeah, I did because I never go to set, unfortunately, thinking, oh great, I've got a really heavy emotional scene today. I kind of like, will stay awake at night worrying about it and all that. So yeah, all of that all of that stuff. I was berating myself. Um, but even like being on a cliff in the middle of the night, we're all absolutely freezing our tits off. And I'm like, why didn't I mean, all the girls wanted was me to set it in Malaga or somewhere, like why have I put us on another freezing cold mountain in Ireland? Um, you know what? I mean, I don't find love scenes that easy either. I definitely, and I also found those scenes with Ian really hard because I I found it I wanted it to be the right thing for Eva, and I wanted people to sort of understand her vulnerability and not think, hang on, this isn't the character. She's the strongest of them all. You know, I was kind of so aware of all of that stuff and second guessing it because I knew we had to, you know, keep it hidden for another episode, a whole other episode where you're sort of, you know, thinking she's an idiot. But so yeah, love scenes I always find hard, you know, because the thing is, it's very it's technical, and you also want it to look beautiful. You know what I mean? You want to enjoy watching those two people kissing, you know, and so you end up sort of being very aware of how it looks, and that's really boring, you know. Um, so yeah, I had those moments throughout going, why did I write this? But you know, at the end of the day, I'm glad because I'm glad I don't think about it when I'm writing. Because if I did, I'd be second guessing myself all the time as a performer, you know? I think you just gotta go where the story takes you and then worry about it down the line, you know.
Yeah, you're not risking holding yourself back through thinking about the end result.
Exactly, exactly. Because you wouldn't if you were writing for someone else. You really wouldn't. And also, I think for the most part, you know, most actors really enjoy the challenge of doing something that's very emotional or you know, something I haven't done before. And so I need to sort of give myself those challenges as well, you know, rather than an easy time.
And after you filmed the first season of Bad Sisters, you were making Best Interests.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you talk about how you felt like one of the things that you were able to really bring into that role because, you know, it's dealing with a lot of heavy subject matter and a lot of grief and processing and a relationship breakdown. And, you know, kind of you feeling like you were also able to bring in, again, like those little moments of lightness and bring some of the fabric of that. And I was interested if then shooting that show in turn actually helped you in coming back into this show, and especially with everything that Eva's going through in the second season and all of the emotional depth that the story carried.
Um, yeah, I don't know actually. I did find that show really hard, and I was definitely berating myself that I put myself through it because I'd just come off Bad Sisters 1 and it was a really it was a difficult one, you know. To be in that state of like pain all the time. I suppose I was a bit more match fit from it though. You know, I suppose in a way you worry that you're going to be able to have a hard time accessing your emotions. And so I suppose in a way it kind of made me less nervous about that. But yeah, it was such a specific thing, best interests. You know, it sort of it didn't feel that transferable really. You know, um yeah, it was a really tough one because obviously I haven't ex had that experience, but I'd experienced my daughter being incredibly ill, and I'd experienced that thing of like as a mother going whatever you have to do, like whatever it takes, do it. And so I was able to sort of find that way. But with Eva and sort of, I know it all seems sort of in the same area, you know, because it is dealing with grief and loss, but it's so different, you know. But no, I suppose what it did was make me feel like I was, you know, for want of a better phrase, match fit for it, you know, that I could go there, I could access that, you know.
No, that makes sense. And I also wanted to ask about creating Amanda Land because I think it's such a great concept to take this character outside of the bubble and the world that we've known her in through Motherland, and especially as a character who loves to project a certain reality, but now is somewhere where the actual reality is so much further apart from what she likes to project. And I was just interested in the process of really figuring out how to adapt that and how to turn it into a spin-off series of your original show.
Well, I think weirdly, it never sort of occurred to us at the time. But when we weren't able to make any more Motherland, it just seemed like it felt really heartbreaking. You know, I mean, often shows kind of end and they, you know, there's a feeling of loss or whatever. And but you also feel like you finished the story, whereas it felt like there was much more there, and we had this audience, like we had a real fan base for it. And then we just talked about ways that we might continue it without, particular actors. But in the end, it just sort of, it was like, you know, so obvious that it had to be Amanda, and it had to be Amanda in a situation that where she's sort of struggling, where she's trying to continue to put out this identity of someone who has it all, who's, in control, who's, a successful person, when they clearly are um the opposite. And and that to us felt like a very like sitcom ready character, Also, she is a little somewhat of a monster, not saying that in a bad way, but in a way that, all great sitcom characters kind of have to be, have a lack of self-awareness, and but you have to kind of care about them. And that's the thing with her. And it's why Lucy Punch is just one of the best out there. She just manages to, turn it so that she can break your heart as well, Um, and the idea of sort of moving it into secondary school for us felt right because, we'd done we told plenty of stories to do with having younger kids, and the juggle and the hardships and the school gates. And where I was at in my life was, my kids were in secondary school, and I really was standing on the edge of a football pitch every weekend. That was the only way you kind of had. That's the only way you kind of continued within that sort of parent community. Um, and yeah, it just felt like in the great tradition of sitcom, that sort of the idea of someone having to sort of downsize and find their way back out just felt like it was going to continue to give a story. And I mean, I don't write the show. I co-created it, and we make it at Merman, but we have this incredible writing team, and we're writing the second season and a Christmas special at the moment. And I mean, all writing is hard, but it's amazing how much this character gives us, because yeah, she's just the gift that keeps on giving. She's and with her mother and with Anne, the sort of and the, the new characters that surround her, some things just sort of fall into place. And yeah, we were just so thrilled to continue the world. We really were.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, I appreciate you talking about all of this and sharing this, and congratulations on the Emmy nomination as well. Thank you so much, Sharon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.